Welcome to this week's video. For this week, we have another battle coming to you, but instead of a book battle, we have the battle of the telenovelas. And instead of two different telenovelas, we have the battle of the same telenovela. However, one was in 1977, 76. The other was the remake in 2004. And I am talking about the Brazilian telenovela Escrava Isaura. Now, I am Portuguese-Canadian. My parents are Portuguese. I was born in Canada. And we love us some telenovelas. However, there aren't that many Portuguese telenovelas, as it were. Most of the telenovelas that we have watched over the years are Brazilian, because they make more of them. And one of the most popular telenovelas of all time was Escrava Isaura. And it translates to the slave girl Isaura. And it is based on a book written, I think, in the 19th century, early 20th century, 19th century. And it tells the story of a young biracial slave girl who has extremely light-colored skin, whereas she can easily pass for white. So she is raised in Brazil. She's born in Brazil, raised in Brazil, in the master's pretty much house. She is more or less a companion to the mistress of the house. And it's sort of her eternal struggle to be free, get her freedom from slavery, and her drama of falling in love and what she suffers at the I want to say plantation, but that's not necessarily, like, I guess it is sort of the equivalent of a southern plantation, but it's in Brazil. And in the original, I believe it was sugarcane that they made, and in the 2004 remake, it was coffee. So Escrava Isaura was a worldwide phenomenon, and to this day is, I believe, being like watched and rewatched by people in like so many different countries. It wasn't just this little Brazilian show that only people in Brazil watched. No, it hit hard. It hit in Russia. It hit in China. It hit in France, United States, Canada. Like, it was Turkey, I think, even. It was huge, the original 1976-77 version. And I'd always grown up hearing about it, but since I was born in 77, I never got a chance to watch the original version. So I was very excited when I came upon the remade 2004 version. And I loved the 2004 version. I loved it so much. It is one of my favorite telenovelas of all time. And I am definitely, I have, my own sort of copy that I've downloaded, and I rewatch it often. And I actually found this website where they sell DVDs of telenovelas. So there are so many like other ones that I also love that I'm so excited to get finally, like O Dono do Mundo, Barriga de Aluguel, O Profeta, like just so many. But the last week, I went to the library, and lo and behold, they had on DVD the 20th anniversary edition of the original 1976-77 Escrava Isaura. Now, granted, it was a 20th anniversary edition, so it was a condensed version of the whole telenovela. But I watched it and adored it, and I'm not sure, I don't know, what they cut out. I do know what they changed, and we're gonna get to that, but I don't know, what they cut out, how long the original one eventually, or how long the original one was, but I do know that I loved the original so much. There are things about the original that I loved more than the 2004 version, and there are things about the 2004 version that I loved more than the original. So I thought I'd do this video comparing the two. So, if you are a fan of telenovelas, Brazilian telenovelas, if you have watched the original Escrava Isaura, if you have watched the 2004 remake of Escrava Isaura, take a seat. We're going to go through some stuff. So, let's start. I figured we'd start with the beginning of what is probably the most polarizing character in terms of the remake and the original, and that is Isaura herself. We'll start with her, because I'm not sure, I could have, a lot of thoughts that might make this too long at the end, but at least if we get it out of the way in the beginning, we can hit the other points maybe a little quicker. So, the 1976 Isaura was played by Lucilia Santos, or Dusanch. And the 2004 Isaura was played by Bianca Rinaldi. Watching both now, I think the 1976 that Lucia, I liked her Isaura better. Not to say that Bianca Rinaldi did a bad job. She did not. She did a fantastic job. I just thought that Lucilia Santos, her Isaura had more fire. Her Isaura had more steel in her. She was still naive. Or no, let me not say that. She was still kind and sweet, but she wasn't naive. Bianca Rinaldi's Isaura was like this innocent, sweet, naive creature who I felt like she sort of played that her strength came from, her faith. Her strength came from God. And any time that anything bad happened, she would always, pray that, that this, not happen, or pray that God give her the strength to endure, all the like bad stuff that that was happening to her, that she would resist the villain's advances because God wanted her to remain pure, and that she could only fight off the evil with God inside of her. And I felt like Lucilia Isaura reminds me of that quote in Game of Thrones from Dany when she and Jon Snow first meet, and she's talking about like everything that she'd went through, and she's sort of like, and she asks him, do you know what kept me standing? Not faith in stories, not faith in myths, legends, not faith in any of that, faith in myself. And that is how Lucia dos Santos, Isaura, felt to me. She prayed, she was a religious girl, but I felt like she didn't rely on her religion to give her strength. She was a strong woman. So I felt like in 2004's Isaura, anything that like happened to her, like when the villain would like make advances towards her, or anybody would like try and like come near her and like be like make a move on her, she would be like all like shy and like this wilting flower. Lucilia's Isaura, she knew what was going on. She knew what the villain wanted. She knew exactly, like, she wasn't no wilting flower. She would, like, there was like a steel in her when she would deny him. She wasn't denying him to keep herself pure for God. She was denying him because she did not love him, and she knew that this son of a bitch was evil and wanted no part of him. She was denying him of her own volition, and her fire came from herself. So in that sense, 1976's Isaura was better. Leoncio, the villain. In the 2004 version, he is played by a man, I think his name is Leopold Pacheco. And his Leoncio was more, I think, like, sexually obsessed with Isaura from, like, day one. And 1976's Leoncio is played by Ruben Falco? DeFalco? We'll see his name again. Just put a pin in that name. And his, like, yeah, when you see, like, when he's a child, he tries to, like, demand that Isaura kiss him. But his obsession with her is not necessarily sexual right off the bat. And it's not necessarily apparent, like, right off the bat. It sort of develops, and it's hard because 2004 Leoncio, I really liked. He was banana sandwich crazy. He was banana sandwich crazy. But, In terms of evil, or in terms of banana sandwich crazy, Ruben Falco's Leoncio doesn't necessarily tip the crazy until about closer towards the end, when Isaura's like constant rejection of him sort of like makes him all the more determined to possess her and to punish her when she does reject him. I think 2004 Leoncio's portrayal is more, the obsession is more apparent right from the beginning. But I don't think I can pick who played it better, because they were both so good. So good. He is this spoiled kid who grows into this spoiled man who thinks that none of the rules apply to him because the justice system in their town pretty much belong to the rich. So he escapes so many of his schemes and crimes many times. And I don't think I can pick. I don't think I can pick between the two, because I really liked both of their portrayals. Which brings us to Almeida, Leoncio's father, who in the 1976 version was played by a man who looked a little bit like, I think his name was Lorne Greene, the father from Bonanza. He looked like the father from Bonanza. I liked the 2004 version of Almeida. I'll tell you why in a second. So 1976's Almeida is more of a cold, cruel, unfeeling person for the most part. He's cold towards his wife. He's cold towards Isaura. He runs the plantation with sort of an iron fist. He's not as bloodthirsty and cruel as his son, but you can see where Leoncio gets his cruelty. Almeida does change a bit. He softens a bit after his wife dies and he remarries. 2004 Almeida is played by Ruben Falco. That's right. You just heard that name. You heard that name as the man who played 1976's Leoncio. He came back for the remake to play Leoncio's father. And it was brilliant. It was just brilliant. Because 2004, I give it to 2004's Almeida. Especially after having watched him play Leoncio in the original. I like him even more now in the 2004 remake. Because he played Almeida This was a man who, yes, runs this coffee plantation and had been cruel and cold, but sort of over time, he's softened. Not because his wife dies, but 2004's Almeida is already softening. And I think part of what changes him, he doesn't completely become a saint, like at all. But he starts to change um, when Isaura's mother dies, because he feels guilty for essentially killing Isaura's mother. Because in the 2004 version, Almeida, and in the 1976 version, is in love with Isaura's mother, who is also a slave, and she dies after, in the 1976 version, she dies in childbirth. After I think she's been, like, beaten for, like, rejecting Almeida. In the 2004 version, she dies after childbirth because she's punished afterwards for rejecting Almeida. And I think it's, and then the Almeida's wife is also feels guilty, so she decides that she's going to take care of Isaura and raise her in the house as a house slave, and sort of like companion. And because Isaura's pretty much white, she's going to be raised with an education and with etiquette, and not in the slave quarters with the rest of the slaves, which we'll put a pin in that because that's going to come back to bite Isaura in the ass later. So it's once Isaura's mother dies, I think, that Almeida starts to change. So that when Isaura's grown and we see Almeida again, he's a softer man. He's still, like he's not a saint. He still owns slaves. And but he's more he's more in tune of what his son is doing and how evil his son has become, and he tries to do more to stop Leoncio than 1976's Almeida. And he actually comes to appreciate and care about Isaura in the 2004 incarnation of the character by Ruben Falco. So for that one, I'll give it to the 2004 Almeida. Now we talk about the wifey. In 1976, for some reason, her name is Esther. Or in the 2004 version, for some reason, they changed her name to Gertrude. I don't know why. But 1976's Esther, she was a bit like, Almeida had no time for her. He treated her horribly. And just, he was like sending her off to like their summer estate or what have you, while he was going to stay in the city and have fun with all the hookers. Um, and she was sort of just this weak woman who was like afraid of her husband, and you can just tell that there was no real, like, that marriage was, I don't know what that marriage was, because I don't know why they got married in the 1976 version, but in the 2004 version, it was, he, I believe, married Gertrude for her family, for her fortune, essentially. And yet, 2004 Gertrude was definitely a strong woman. She could play her husband like a fiddle. She knew that he was running around chasing after the slave girls. She tolerated that to a point, but because in that time, and even like still today, a lot of women, they won't like leave, especially back then, they would not like leave their husbands over a little bit of, skirt chasing. But 1976's Esther, she was just this weak, head bowed, afraid of her husband, kind of like woman. 2004's Gertrude was definitely not that. She tolerated his skirt chasing, but she was constantly threatening to leave him, go back to like her father, and it was sort of like the threat of constantly making that threat would keep Almeida in line. And as ridiculous as this sounds, you could tell that 2004's Almeida honestly loved his wife. Even with the skirt chasing. It's very weird, but if you saw them together, you would understand. Because, and it's, if you've seen enough historical dramas and if you've read enough historical romances, you understand that men back then thought that you treat your wife one way and you treat your mistress or whores differently. That in that society, it was expected that married men would find entertainments on the side. So this was sort of not new to Gertrude. Like, she understood, but she knew how to play him so he didn't push it too far. And when it came to Isaura, she dictated sort of how Isaura was raised, and she didn't ask Almeida for permission to raise Isaura this way or that way. She didn't ask Almeida, how to, if Isaura could like have like piano lessons, or like, she told him this is what's going to happen, and if you don't do this thing that I like, then um, I'm going to leave you, which she never would, but um, I'm there's even like one point where I don't remember what they were fighting about, but she even threatens that she's going to withhold her favors from him. And he's all like discombobulated, like, I'm your husband and I have rights. And she's like, you have rights, but if you want to get on this, chop chop, my hubby. Chop chop. So 2004 Gertrude, I loved her. I loved her so much. Um, but I didn't put it on the list, and I can't believe I forgot her because I loved her so much. Unfortunately, very early on in the series, in the 2004 version, and in the 1976 version, Gertrude / Esther dies. But she makes Almeida promise her that when she dies, that he's going to give Isaura her freedom. He's going to draw up the papers, and Isaura won't be a slave anymore. And Almeida promises that he's going to do that. Except he doesn't. And he doesn't because he, in 2004's version, he's come to care about Isaura. And feels like he's mourning his wife, and he's grief-stricken about his wife, and he feels like Isaura is like the one good thing in that house, and that his wife loved her. So if she stays, it would be like having a piece of his wife still with him. Not in like a sexual way, because no, there was none of that. So for his own like selfish reasons, he doesn't give Isaura her freedom. But he does promise that when he dies, that Isaura will have her freedom. And then Leoncio screws that up by somehow convincing his father to give him power of attorney. And so Leoncio is the one who, as the heir, would have gotten everything anyway. But he has Almeida writes like in his will, but Leoncio finds the will and destroys it. And in the 1976 version, it's the same thing. He writes he signs the paper giving Isaura her freedom. Almeida does. But Leoncio ends up finding it and burning it. So then Almeida, after his wife dies, in the 1976 version, he gets remarried. However, he gets remarried to a hooker named Carmen. Now, originally, I wasn't sure about Carmen because I felt like she might, she's just into him for his money and for the power and all that stuff. And I'm sure that was all true. But I think she does come to care about Almeida. And she ends up being the most fantastic character that she's sort of the 2004 equivalent of Carmen is a woman named Tomasia who is not married to Almeida, does not get married to Almeida, but who Leoncio gets pregnant, and she's not a hooker, she's just this girl that Leoncio seduced, and Leoncio gets her pregnant, and she sadly loses the baby when he pushes her down the stairs when she makes a scene at his engagement party, wanting to him to acknowledge her and the child that they are expecting. But she is poor, so he has no interest in marrying her. And when she threatens to ruin him, he pushes her down the stairs and she loses her baby. And Carmen is, and Tomasia is also a amalgamation of another 1976 character, and that's Taish. So the 2004 Tomasia is a amalgamation of Carmen and Taish from 1976. And let me see. Yeah, okay, we'll hit them next. So Tomasia is this strong, badass character who, after Leoncio pretty much causes her to, no, he does. He pushes her down the stairs and she loses the baby and tries to sort of ruin her in society. And she ends up marrying this count who Leoncio ends up killing in a duel at which he cheats at. So Tomasia and Leoncio are bitter enemies, and Tomasia spends the entire show plotting different manners of revenge against Leoncio and helping Isaura at every turn because it's the right thing and because of revenge against Leoncio. And I loved both. Like, I loved all three characters because Taish and Carmen do also their very best to help Isaura. So I really liked all three characters. I don't think I could pick. Like, I love Tomasia, but yeah, I loved Carmen was like so funny. 1976. She was so funny and like strong and just badass. Taish was a little, sweeter. She was still, she was badass strong, but she was a little sweeter. She wasn't quite as sassy, but she did what she could to help Isaura. Joaquina versus Januaria. 2004, Joaquina was this old slave woman who was a slave at the Almeida's plantation with her brother, um, who his wife had died. Excuse me, her brother-in-law. So his wife had died after being poisoned by Leoncio. Um, and he and his sister-in-law, Joaquina, were sort of substitute grandparents for Isaura. And they, loved her, and their relationship with her was very, very sweet. And 1976's Januaria was the house cook. I don't know why they, changed her name to Joaquina and made her like older, and they sort of changed her whole like storyline. But and I loved Joaquina. I loved 2004 Joaquina. She was, sweet, and she was strong, and she was protective of Isaura. But I have to give it to 1976's Januaria. She was hilarious. She was a slave in that house. However, ain't nobody gonna be telling her shit. She would talk back to the owners, to the masters. She was just very sassy, very snarky. Yeah, I love Januaria so much. She loved Isaura like a daughter, and yeah, I have to give it to 1976. Next, whoa, okay, Henrique. Right away, I'm going to tell you that 2004 Henrique has my heart. Gabriel Grisindo, who I will pretty much follow into any novella that he's in. He's that fantastic. One of my absolute favorite Brazilian actors of all time. He wants him some Isaura in the 2004 version. And I always felt that he and Isaura should have ended up together. Alvaro was nice. Alvaro was fine. But I felt that the genuine chemistry was there between 2004's Enrique and Isaura. And everything, like how hard he fought to help her, and just how much he suffered to be with her. And I understand. Isaura only saw him as a friend. And he does. He's very, like, flirty with her, sort of like in the beginning. And, he wants to, like, buy her to come to, like, his house and, like, be, like, his slave so he can, like, get him some. But eventually his feelings grow, like, deeper. But Isaura is just like, no. No. Because, and her excuse is that because you treated me like a slave, like right from the beginning. You didn't treat me like a person. Fine. However, everything he had done, like, after that point, I'm sorry. He ends up with someone else, which, yeah, we can talk about her now. He ends up with this girl who is some kind of distant cousin, whatever, removed. of his that comes from Portugal to to visit them and eventually stay. And her name's Aurora. This wet blanket, she was a beautiful girl, but her character was just one big wet blanket. The whole time. And she made him one of my favorite characters into this simping, just the only thing that they would do, the only thing that I saw of any like sign of love or grand passion between them was that they would be reading poetry to each other. Like, that is what made her fall in love with him, was when he would read her poetry. This guy who we never saw be interested in poetry before, all of a sudden, all he does is chase this woman around and read her poetry. So, I hated how Henrique's character developed once Aurora showed up. And Aurora was this jealous bitch. Even if she was an interesting bitch, that would be something. But no, she was a jealous wet blanket bitch who never wanted Henrique to help Isaura because, okay, yes, Henrique at a point had been in love with Isaura, but he decided that he was going to let that go after Isaura made it clear that they had no future together, and he was going to move on with Aurora. However, he was still a good man, a good, decent man, who wanted to fight injustice when he saw it, and that included helping Isaura. And Aurora was this jealous, judgmental bitch who made him choose between helping this slave get her freedom or staying by Aurora's side, because she was threatened, because she knew that Isaura was 100 times the woman that she was. Henrique settled, in my opinion. Henrique settled because Isaura didn't want him. Stupid Isaura, but we'll get there in a second. Yeah, so he made a choice that he was going to have a future with this wet blanket. And yeah. 1976, Henrique, there was none of that. None of that happened. He was, Leoncio's brother-in-law, because Leoncio marries Henrique's sister, Malvina, which, same thing happens in 2004. But we'll get to that Malvina in a second. But Enrique, in the 1976 version, is Leoncio's brother-in-law. So that's the same, because he marries the sister. But he's best friends with this guy named Tobias, which we'll get to in a second. And Enrique, Tobias' sister, is Thais, who we mentioned before in the Carmen, Thais, Tomasia comparison. And Thais is in love with Enrique. And that was sort of very sweet, because we get to see Enrique is sort of this Um, he's a good guy, 1976 Enrique, but he's sort of like self-involved, a bit of a playboy. Um, he doesn't really see Taij until later. Um, it's when Taij, when he sees how much she wants to help Isaura, that he starts to realize what a good woman she is, and um, falls in love with her then. So it's sort of, it takes a while, but he gets there. And um, I liked 1976 Enrique, but Gabriel Grisendo has my heart. Yeah, 2004 Enrique, just, he has my heart. In my mind, I pretend that um, both the guy that Isaura ends up with, which we'll get to in a second, and Aurora end up dying in the future. And Enrique and Isaura find each other again and stay together and live happily ever after. That's my little fan fiction in my head. Um, Miguel. Um, Miguel is Isaura's father. 1976's Miguel, he was okay, but he didn't really have much personality. 2004's Miguel, I liked a lot. I really liked him. There was the never-ending struggle to get his daughter free, but he also sort of had his own thing. Like, yeah, he had his own character and personality. He wasn't just this father who was trying to get his daughter free from her life as a slave. 90% of him was that, but he had an extra 10% of like his own personality that 1976's Miguel did not have. And 2004's Miguel ends up marrying Tomazia, which I love their story so very much because it's definitely a sort of like, you would not see that coming, that romance coming, but when it happens, you're like, of course these two end up together. Because Tomazia, Lord, from the beginning of the 2004, she suffers. She suffers a lot. I mean, she is seduced by this piece of shit. She gets pregnant. She loses her baby, and with that baby, any chance of conceiving again. She falls in love for, and seems to have found her happily ever after, till Leoncio comes and set up for her again as well by killing her husband. So, and like throughout this all, she's been helping Isaura, she's been in Miguel's orbit, the two of them are friends, and it's very much a sort of friends to lovers story. And I thought that development was brilliant because you don't see it coming. It sneaks up on you. But when it happens, it's perfection. I love their relationship so much and their love story so much. Um, Rosa! Oh, Rosa. So, I give it to 2004 Rosa, played by Patricia Franca, I think. She was brilliant because And 1976's Rosa was good, but she was just pure evil. There was no redeeming, there was nothing likable about 1976 Rosa. Like, at all. 2004 Rosa. I freaking loved her. I loved her so much that I got so frustrated and angry with her when she would let her jealousy of Isaura ruin her own happiness. 1976's Rosa, she was just evil for evil's sake. There was no, like, they tried to say that, like, she had her motivation of she was jealous of Isaura because she lived in the slave quarters and Isaura lived in the big house like a lady and got to, like, learn all these things like a lady while she was treated like a slave. And 2004 gives that sort of same basis for Rosa's hatred of Isaura, but you understand more. Like, it's more expanded and more, like, there's peaks and valleys where there are moments where you can see that Rosa tries to change, but her hatred of Isaura, even when she's trying to get over that and be Isaura's friend, it's like she can't let herself be happy. And just, she was just more likable. 2004's Rosa was just more likable. And they changed it from the 1976 version because in the 2004 version, you find out that Rosa is actually the daughter of the colonel who is Almeida's best friend. So she is actually the daughter of a white man. And that whole relationship is just very sort of twisty and up and down, and there's times where, like, you know, you feel so happy for Rosa in, like, so many times where, like, the father, Colonel Sebastian, takes her in and is, like, you know, like, good to her. But then there's other times where he's a judgmental piece of crap who is embarrassed by her manner. And never mind the fact that Rosa was not raised to be a lady, so he has, like, no patience for the fact that she has the manners of a slave, or she's not educated. She hasn't had any of Isaura's education and etiquette training, but yet this Colonel Sebastian, her father, expects her to behave the way Isaura behaves. So that, in a way, also helps fuel Rosa's hatred of Isaura. In the 2004 version, Isaura is more friendly to Rosa because I think Isaura kind of understands where Rosa's hatred is coming from, and they had, like, actually, like, grown up together and they had played together, and Isaura tries to be Rosa's friend so many times. And she just, like, she forgives Rosa for, like, a lot. 1976's Isaura beats Rosa's ass in a scene that I would have died to have seen in 2004. I wish this scene had happened. However, 2004's Isaura would not have, she would not have done this. There's a scene in 1976 where Isaura has pretty much, her give a damn has been busted for Rosa's constant schemes and plots. and hatred towards her that there's a scene where Isaura just attacks her and beats the ever-loving shit out of Rosa. I was watching that scene and oh my god, I was so happy. And I was so wishing that we got that scene in 2004. But because of the way 2004's Isaura was played, it wasn't going to happen. Because 2004's Isaura was all sweetness and light and just, wouldn't hurt a fly. And 1976 Isaura, like I said, she was a good girl. But if you effed around on her, you were going to find out. 1976's Rosa effed around and found out because Isaura beat her ass. It was such a good scene. I cannot even. So yeah, I have to give it to 2004's Rosa. Loved her so much. Just wish that she had gotten out of her own damn way. Because she had the power for her own happiness. But she let her hatred for Isaura constantly F up her own life. So now we get to Tobias versus Álvaro versus Álvaro. So Tobias does not exist in the 2004 version. Because in the 2004 version, we have Isaura only falling in love with one man, and that's Álvaro. In the 1976 version, she falls in love twice. And I liked that a lot better. And she meets Tobias, we'll call him, the English version. And it's the same sort of setup as the 2004 meeting with Álvaro. But I liked Isaura and Tobias better because it seemed more genuine. He meets her. He doesn't know that she's a slave. And they gradually fall in love, even though she tries to fight it. But they gradually fall in love. And just the way that they fall in love is so sweet and genuine, and I loved them so much. So of course, Leoncio has to ruin it and ends up kidnapping and then killing Tobias. I would have liked to see him in the 2004 version. But I really liked their love story. But, so, Isaura is, grief-stricken, and it takes her a while, but she falls in love again with this man named Álvaro in the 1976 version. And again, I'm going to say that I like the 1976 version of Álvaro better than the 2004. Not to say that I don't like 2004 Álvaro. I did. Theo Becker, he's hot. He's hot. But I felt more invested in the love story between Isaura and Álvaro in 1976. Because I felt like it stemmed from a more genuine place. And plus the 2004 version, I wanted her with Enrique. But we talked about that already. I felt like when Isaura and Alvaro meet in the 2004 version, I felt like the attraction for Isaura only happens once she finds out he's an abolitionist. That is the only thing about him that made her fall in love with him. In the 1976 version, their love story starts a lot more genuinely and organically. She is still grieving, Tobias, but, it's been, I think, a year or something. So she still has that hurt in her heart. So when Alvaro comes around, when she meets him, she tries to, keep her distance because, one, she doesn't know if she's ready to fall in love again. Two, she's a slave. Three, she thinks she'll be betraying Tobias's memory. So it's a bit of a slower burn for Isaura and Alvaro in 1976, but I think it's stronger for it. Because 2004's Alvaro and Isaura were supposed to have this epic grand love, and I didn't see it. It was nice. It was fine. But I felt like the only reason Isaura is in love with this man is because he's an abolitionist. And 2004's Alvaro was fine, but I felt like he was the carbon copy cardboard cutout of what a romance hero was supposed to be. I felt like he had sort of all the hero traits, but no sort of personality as himself as a man. I felt like 1976's Alvaro was just, I felt his love for Isaura. I felt their love for each other once it became this mutual thing. So, I give it to 1976's Alvaro. I just liked his character more. I felt more invested in his character and his love story with Isaura. Well, Malvina. Now we're with Malvina, who is Enrique's sister and Leoncio's wife. I will give it most definitely, wholeheartedly, to 1976's Malvina. I loved her so much. She was so good. She was such a good woman. 2004's Malvina could go get eaten by a lion. I hated her. Oh, she came off like she was this sweet. No, I wouldn't call her sweet, but yeah. She came off like she was this sweet young lady who, had all the good manners and was just this society girl who, loved Leoncio and she had this veneer of goodness. However, as soon as she realized that Leoncio wanted Isaura, she did that thing that so many women do, where they take it out on the woman, not on their husbands. She didn't get mad at Leoncio for being a rapey piece of shit chasing after this slave girl who didn't want him. She blamed Isaura for being the slave girl who enticed her husband. And then I'm supposed to believe that after that after Leoncio dies and she falls in love with Alvaro's best friend Geraldo, I'm supposed to believe that they are going to have this wonderful romance, that she's finally found happiness with this man. I didn't want her to find happiness with him. I wanted her to and die. I hated 2004's Malvina. And yet, 1976's Malvina, sadly, is the one that dies. When Leoncio kidnaps Tobias, Malvina finds out where Leoncio is hiding him and goes to try and rescue him. However, Leoncio believes that it is Isaura who has gone off to try and rescue her beloved, and in a fit of jealous rage, he decides that fine, she doesn't want to be with me, she wants to be with this Tobias, then they're going to die together. And he locks the cabin door where he's being held hostage, Tobias is being held hostage, not knowing that it's his wife Malvina that is inside, not Isaura, and he sets it on fire. And that's how Tobias and Malvina die. I was so mad because I loved this Malvina, 1976's Malvina. I adored her so much. She was so genuinely kind and good and did everything she could to help Isaura and knew exactly what her husband was. And she didn't have 2004's Gertrude's ability to control her husband, like Gertrude did with Almeida. And just, I loved her so much. 2004 Malvina, she knew what her husband was, and yet, at some point, she does leave Leoncio, but she goes back to him because she misses him and loves him. Knows why? Because he treated her like crap, and he was blatantly chasing after Isaura, but she goes back to him because, and I quote, I can't be who's gonna want me after I've left my husband? I can't be a woman alone. Which, yes, in society, that was a thing. However, the point of evil that Leoncio had gotten to the point where, she finally leaves him, and then for her to go back, and yet twist it around so that she can justify to herself going back, because, oh, my poor Leoncio, he can't help it. He's just a man, and Isaura is bewitching him. And just, I hated her. I hated her. I hated her. I wanted her to be the one to be set on fire. But no. Instead, we lost the good Malvina in 1976. So, I give it to 1976's Malvina. I loved her so much. One thing that we did not have in 1976 was Gabrielle and Elena. Now, in the 1976 version, we only have Enrique and Malvina as the children of the. In 1976, he's a counselor of some kind. In 2004, he's a colonel. But Sebastian. I don't remember what his name was in 1976, but he only has 2 children. In the 2004 version, he has 3 children. And one of them is this badass little manic pixie, this sassy little bit of badassery named Elena, who falls in love with this guy named Gabriel, who is the son of a woman that Sebastian had been involved with, Sebastian's first love. But for reasons, they were not able to be together, and he broke her heart. But they had met up again later, even though both of them were married, and they had slept together, and the result was Gabrielle. So Elena and Gabrielle unwittingly fall in love with each other, not knowing that they are siblings. Now, this is in the 2004 version. None of this happens in the 1976 version, which I think is unfortunate, because I loved their love story so very much. And I don't care if it's incesty. I don't care. I am all for fictional incest. I don't give a damn. And I just wish that they hadn't gone that route where Gabriel was Helena's brother. I wish that twist did not happen, because then again, Gabriel ends up falling in love with an older woman who happens to be Alvaro's mother, which, not mad about it. But Elena ends up falling in love with this doctor who is a big a wet blanket as Aurora was. And again, the only thing that Helena and this Dr. Diogo, had in common was that they both liked poetry. In my opinion, there was no love there. There was no passion there, even though it was there on the screen. And they showed it to us, but I didn't feel it. To my dying day, I will always say that Helena belonged with Gabriel. I don't care if he was her brother. Get rid of that. I don't want that plot point in there. That never happened. He never became her brother. So I give it to the 2004 for giving us that little bit of Gabriel and Elena for as little as we had it before they went and effed it up. Which brings us to Sebastian and Gioconda, who is Gabriel's mother. Her and Sebastian had been lovers when they were younger, but Sebastian married a woman, made a marriage for the fortune of a woman, marriage of convenience for a woman. And then and Gioconda is also Tomasia's mother. So Tomasia and Gabrielle are brother and sister. So Gioconda gets brought into the story because Tomasia gets involved with Leoncio, and he seduces her, and she loses the baby and all that. So after like 25 or something, 30 years, Sebastian and Gioconda are face to face with each other again, and the feelings are still there, and it's this wonderful look at sort of a more mature love story, which I just adored so much, because Sebastian can be a bit of an ass butt with the way that he treated his children. He wanted poor Helena to marry this god-awful doctor, knowing that she was in love with Gabrielle, but he didn't want her with Gabrielle because Gabrielle was Tamazia's brother, and Tamazia had that thing with Leoncio, and Leoncio was married to Malvina, who was the Colonel Sebastian's daughter. So Sebastian did not want his daughter Elena to have anything to do with Tamazia's family. But so there was that friction of Sebastian and Gioconda, which would have been nice to see in the 1976 version, because I felt like 1976's Sebastian didn't really have any real sort of personality. I mean, even when his daughter Malvina dies, we don't really get to see him sort of grieve. With, like, he just didn't have like a personality, in my opinion. 2004 Sebastian, oh, I freaking loved him as much as I wanted to beat him over the head with a 2x4. I felt about him kind of the same way I felt about Rosa, which is ironic because they were father and daughter. So it kind of like, Rosa was the way that she was because the way that, she was raised in like the slave quarters and all that, but also very much because she was Sebastian's daughter and they were very similar in temperament. So yeah, I loved Sebastian, even though there were times when I wanted him to get eaten by a lion. When I thought the way that he treated Rosa went too far. Beltor versus Belchior. So there's a gardener in both 76 and 2004. And he is this, not the handsomest of men. He's old. He's got a hunchback. He's got some misshapen teeth. He's just really like, they made this guy as ugly as you could possibly be. And he's in love with Isaura. God bless him. And 2004's Belchior. They changed Beltor's name to Belchior for some reason in 2004. And he also is in love with Isaura. I liked 1976's Beltor. I liked 2004's Belchior a lot more. He was funnier. He was he was a lot more entertaining. 1976's Beltor was sweet, but he wasn't funny. 2004's Belchior is hysterical. So I give it to 2004 for that one. We're almost there. We're almost to the end. We got Andrea, and Santa. Andre and Santa. In the 2004 version, Andrea is in love with Isaura. Isaura's milkshake brings all the boys to the yard. In both time periods. So he's in love with Isaura. Yet, he has genuine feelings for Rosa. And Isaura only thinks of him as a friend. And Rosa is in love with Andre. Which also doesn't help her jealousy of Isaura. Because she knows that Andre is in love with Isaura. Even though he has feelings for Rosa. And 1976's Andre, when he first sees Isaura, and for like a minute, he has like a little bit of a crush on her, but that goes away. That goes away like really quickly, and then he falls in love with this other slave girl named Santa. And their love story is adorable. I liked their love story a lot. They even have this baby. They have this little girl who they name Malvina because Malvina was this. Santa was sort of Malvina's lady, sort of companion. And she treated Santa, wonderfully, and as much of a friend as the slave mistress relationship could allow. Um, and their love story was just beautiful, and I just kept praying, dear God, don't let anything happen to Santa. Don't let anything happen to Santa. And thankfully, it did not. They lived happily ever after, and it was beautiful. 2004's Andrea goes through a lot, sort of more. He's more of a fighter for his people, and he loves Isaura for a long ass time, until finally she makes it clear that she's just not that into him. And when he sees that she is genuinely in love with this Alvaro person, he realizes, okay, that's never going to happen. I need to sort of go and live my life. And I really liked his relationship with Rosa. I liked that love story a lot. Because Santa does not exist in the 2004 version, which I'm sad about, but I'm okay because they put him with the version of Rosa that I loved, the 2004 Rosa. So I think I like them both. I like 1976's Andre and 2004's Andre. I just think in 2004's Andre, he's a little bit more fleshed out. We got to see more of him as this fighter to free his people. And we got to see more of him trying to move on after Isaura and, sort of fight for his own freedom. And his complicated relationship with Rosa as the first girl that he'd ever loved, because he loved her before Isaura. But Rosa is just this schemy, she's not the best of people, but he sort of sees past that to the good that she could be, and he wants her to give in to that so that they could have a future together. And that's sort of their relationship, and I really, really loved it. And I was sad about the end of their story, because Rosa wants to be this lady of the manor, and Andre wants to go off and fight for his people's freedom. So they can't coexist. And there's an alternate ending to the 2004 version that I did not like, where Rosa loses Andre and then kills herself. In the 1976 version, Rosa mistakenly drinks poison that she meant for Isaura. I was fine with that ending. I was perfectly fine. Oh, and in the 2004 version, Leoncio is murdered, and there's this whole big murder mystery of who did it, because pretty much by this point of the novella, by the time that Leoncio dies, everybody had a motive. So there was a lot of suspects. In the 1976 version, when Alvaro comes and basically says, because Leoncio is hella debt, and Alvaro ends up buying his debt, and so he ends up owning the entire plantation and estate, and uh, ends up freeing all the slaves, and Leoncio pretty much loses everything, and Leoncio goes off into a room and kills himself. So that was the 1976 ending to Leoncio. I and they sort of have an almost they have a nod to that in the 2004 version, where Leoncio was going to kill himself when um, when he's lost. When the same sort of thing happens, Alvaro comes and is basically like, "I own all this shit now. You get out. The slaves are freed. Bye." Uh, Leoncio goes and locks himself in a room and is going to kill himself, but at the last minute sort of chickens out and like doesn't do it. And then goes off and kidnaps Isaura, and that ends up uh, with her waking up and with like the bloody knife, and everybody thinks that like she's did it and she's like in jail, and but she's certain that she could have never done it because she doesn't have murder in her heart. She's God would not, she's too much of a religious person to murder anyone. 1976 is Isaura? I could have easily seen her stabbing the shit out you. I would have been like, I think she did it. 2004 is out of. I could never. I'm innocent. I have only love and goodness and light in my heart. That, but yeah. Um. So I I didn't like the alternate ending of the 2004 version where Rosa kills herself. And there's the alternate, and then there's like the other ending where it just ends with Andre going off and Rosa sort of like there in the house crying. But you sort of assume that, eventually either they're going to find each other again, or Rosa's going to stay there and like be like the lady of the manor and, like live her life. And I much prefer that ending for her, for the 2004 version. The 1976 version, I was totally fine with Rosa getting poisoned by her own poison. That was awesome. I was totally fine with that. So, overall, I loved both. I don't think that one is better than the other. There are things I liked better in the 2004 version. There are things I liked better in the 1976 version. So, I don't think I can pick. Like, and I'm sure that there are people who have their opinions. Like my mom has not seen the 2004 version, and she says she doesn't want to see the 2004 version because she says that she loves the 1970s version and it's perfect for her, and she doesn't want to see a remake because she doesn't want to like see like them like ruin, I guess, like her memory of the original. Which give me the remake. I want to see both. um, but yeah, I don't think that I can pick. I I love both. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know like what was missing from the 20th anniversary 1976 edition that I got, because again, it stated that it was a condensed version. Um, but I loved what I saw, and yeah, I love, and just the idea of Ruben Falco playing Leonski like as such. Oh, he was so good. He was so good in the 1976 version. And I remember my mom telling me stories about how they would like people were so invested in this show that they would slap him and like throw tomatoes at him in the streets. The actor, the poor actor who's just going around doing his job, is like getting tomatoes thrown at him. Yeah. So yeah, I can't choose. I love both. I love both. And I'm so glad that I got to see the 70s version because yeah, Isaura was just like so good. So good in the 70s version. Again, not to say that she wasn't good in the 2004 version. She was very nice. But oh my god, if I I would take 1970s Isaura into a bar with me for I would stand next to her in a bar fight. I would bring her with me if I had to fight someone in a bar. I would bring 1970s Isaura with me because 1970s Isaura could throw down. But my Gabriel Grisindo as Enrique in 2004, oh, he has my heart. He has my heart. So there we are. we are at a stalemate. We cannot choose. So that's going to be it for this week's video. I will leave it to you. If you have seen both versions of this telenovela, by all means, let me know. Which do you prefer? The 1970s original or the 2004 remake? So yeah, let me know which you like. Which you like better. And that's gonna be it for this week's video. Follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/authorejamie. Like my Facebook page at facebook.com/authorejamie, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!